Ever felt like you're just sort of drowning in customer data, wishing there was a shortcut to really get what's happening with your audience? Well, today we're doing a deep dive. We've got some Power BI exercises, some really interesting discussions on data analysis. Our goal here is to pull out the most effective ways to visualize and really understand customer behavior. Everything from basic revenue comparisons right up to, advanced customer value segmentation.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this isn't just about clicking buttons in Power BI, right? It's really about learning how to ask the right questions of your data and increasingly how to talk effectively to these analytical tools, even AI, to unlock those really profound business insights. We're going to show you just how powerful Power BI can be for doing exactly that. It gives you that kind of rapid path to being incredibly well informed.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We're starting with something pretty foundational, really. Understanding how your business is performing over time. Like, imagine trying to figure out quickly if this month's sales are better than last year's for the same month. Power BI lets us crunch those numbers fast and then, crucially, make them super easy to interpret, flagging what you need to focus on.
Exactly. And the core idea here is what we call comparison indicators. These are really vital metrics because they don't just give you a raw number. They show you that number in context. So comparing it to a benchmark, like, say, the previous period or a specific target, it immediately tells you if performance is up or down and by how much without you having to, do the mental math.
Right. So setting this up in Power BI, we first need to calculate our total revenue, basically summing up the value of each order. Then, for the comparison piece, we need that same period total revenue. And Power BI makes it surprisingly easy, letting us just look back exactly 1 year from any point in time. And then finally, to see the percentage change that growth or decline, we just calculate the standard ratio, current performance versus that prior period.
But the real breakthrough, I think, comes when you take those calculations and turn them into visuals you can understand instantly. Once those measures are set up, you can just pop them into a simple table view. Show the year, month, total revenue, and that percentage change ratio. But the magic, as you said, really happens with conditional formatting. You can set up data bars, maybe green for positive changes, orange for negative. And you can layer on background and font colors too, like white background, black text for positive growth, maybe a red background with dark red text for declines. This doesn't just present numbers, it immediately flags performance visually. You might instantly see, for instance, a consistent orange bar in July across several years. That tells you straight away, okay, July is always slow for us. Or maybe a sudden big green bar in March shouts, whoa, something good happened here, we need to figure out what that was. It's about spotting patterns at a glance.
Yeah, that visual flagging is so useful. And it gets even more dynamic with something like a line and clustered column chart, right? So imagine plotting total revenue as the columns, and then that same period total revenue ratio as a line overlaid on top. You could put the month along the bottom axis and then use the year as like a series to compare different years. It gives you that dual perspective, seeing the actual revenue volume and the growth rate together month by month, year by year, makes it easy to spot trends, those dips or surges. And you can even turn on data labels if you need the precise numbers.
Absolutely. And what this ultimately lets businesses do is pinpoint those periods of really strong growth or, conversely, significant decline very quickly.
Yeah.
It helps you figure out, for example, that last November's big surge wasn't just, seasonal variation. It was specifically tied to that big marketing push or maybe a new product launch. And that's the crucial insight that prompts the next question. Okay, can we replicate that success, or was that just a one-off? It really moves you beyond just knowing what happened to starting to understand why it happened.
That instant feedback on revenue is definitely powerful. But, okay, beyond the big picture numbers, what about the people? The customer is actually driving those numbers. How do we start making sense of our customer base? Because let's be honest, not all customers are the same, are they?
Not at all. And this is where something like the Quadrant Chart by MAQ software comes in really handy. It's a fantastic custom visual for this. It's a great way to visually segment your customers based on a couple of key metrics. So you might put, say, member count on the x-axis, how many customers are in a group, then maybe per capita spending amount on the y-axis, how much each one spends on average. And you could even add total spending amount on a radial axis, like the size of the bubble, to show the overall financial clout of each group. Setting it up like this immediately creates these distinct customer segments, gives you a visual map of your customer base almost.
Yeah, and it's quite clever how Power BI lets you customize those quadrant names too. So you're not just looking at, quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. You can actually label them with meaningful categories like high member, high contribution, or low member, high contribution, low member, low contribution, and high member, low contribution. Makes it much more intuitive. And you mentioned something important there, fixing the access ranges, like setting X from 0 to 24,000 and Y from 0 to 16,000, for example. That's crucial, isn't it? To keep the comparison consistent when you start filtering or interacting with the data, stops the chart jumping all over the place.
Exactly. Consistency is key for comparison. And speaking of interacting, how do you actually explore these insights? Well, the member type slicer is really important here. You can filter by, say, VIP versus general members, and you immediately see how those different groups cluster within the quadrants. Maybe you filter for VIP, and boom, they all appear in the low member high contribution quadrant. That tells you instantly, okay, we don't have many VIPs, but wow, each one spends a lot. Highlights their critical value. Then you can bring in other visuals, like a map showing city and member count. Adds that geographical layer. You might suddenly discover a hotspot of your high contribution folks in a city you weren't really focusing on. A simple pie chart can complement that, just showing the proportion of members by city. And maybe a basic card visual just displaying the overall total spending amount for whatever group you've selected gives you that immediate summary.
Right. So putting it all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? Well, this combination of visuals lets you pinpoint where your high-value customers are located, understand the makeup of different member types, like VIPs versus regular members, and quickly see their financial impact. This isn't just, data for data's sake. It's actual intelligence that helps you craft much more targeted marketing campaigns and retention strategies. You can start answering questions like, are our VIPs mostly in one region? Or do our low spenders tend to buy certain types of products? Really practical stuff. Okay, now for the grand finale, maybe. A really powerful way to understand customer value, even predict future behavior, the RFM model. This is where we get seriously granular and strategic.
Ah, yes. RFM stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. Recency, how recently did a customer buy something? Frequency, how often do they buy? And monetary, how much do they typically spend? I sometimes think of it like a friendship. How recently did you talk? That's recency. How often do you connect? Frequency. And how much value or support do you exchange? That's kind of monetary. RFM applies that same intuitive logic to customer relationships. It captures the life cycle of interaction, giving you a really comprehensive view of engagement and potential value.
Okay, so how do we build this in Power BI? First, we need to figure out the time interval from now for every order, right, based on the order day, just counting the days from some fixed point in time. Then from that, we calculate the R, F, and M for each customer individually. So R recency is the minimum time interval, their most recent purchase date, basically. F frequency is just a count of their total orders. Simple enough. And M, monetary, is the sum of all their spending, their total contribution. Then we need to pull all that together into a new RFM table, right? Aggregating R, F, and M for each unique member ID.
Precisely. And the really crucial step, the one that unlocks the strategic value, is creating what we often call a member value RFM column or category. This uses, well, some conditional logic, could be IF statements or SWIT-CH functions in DAX to classify customers, usually into about 8 distinct categories. And these categories are based on whether their individual R, F, and M scores are above or below the average for your whole customer base. So, for example, an important value customer, that's someone who scores high on all three, R, F, and M, bought recently, buys often, spends a lot. Your current stars, then you might have an important development customer, maybe high recency and frequency, but lower monetary value. They're engaged, they buy often, but perhaps smaller amounts. So there's potential to encourage bigger purchases. Or, critically, an important retention customer, maybe high frequency and monetary in the past, but low recency now. They were great customers, haven't bought lately. Big red flag, they're at risk, but definitely worth trying to win back. Each category tells a very specific, actionable story about that customer segment's relationship with the business.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do we visualize these RFM insights once we've created those categories? You mentioned using arrow charts, maybe one for R, one for F, one for M, showing how each measure is distributed across those 8 member value RFM categories. That would help you see the typical patterns for each segment, wouldn't it? Like, okay, our retention customers clearly have low recency scores. And then presumably you'd use a slicer based on that member value RFM category. So you can dynamically filter everything else just to look at, say, your important value customers or zoom in on those important retention customers.
Exactly. The slicer makes it interactive. And another really powerful visual here is the matrix. Think of it as a super table. You'd have your 8-member value RFM categories as rows, and then columns showing key aggregated metrics for each category. Things like the count of member IDs, how many customers in each group, count of order numbers, sum of bonus points, sum of contribution amounts, sum of purchase quantity. And again, you can apply conditional formatting. Those data bars are great here to columns like count of member ID, contribution amount, bonus points. It lets you visually compare the scale of each segment's activity and value instantly. You might see, for example, that your important retention customers are a smaller group by count, but their total contribution amount bar is huge, reinforces why they're so important to keep. And this is a critical but for any of this cross-analysis to work correctly, you absolutely must have properly set up the data relationships in Power BI. That connection between your new RFM summary table and your original detailed transaction table is vital. Get that wrong, and your analysis will be off.
Got it. Relationships are key. Okay, and for a really dynamic view, you mentioned a scatter plot with a play axis. That sounds cool. So plotting something like average purchase quantity against average contribution amount, maybe with product names as the individual points, to see how different products perform. And then the play axis uses the order date, maybe grouped by month, to animate the chart over time. So you can actually watch how product trends or customer spending evolves month by month, like a mini movie of your business performance.
Exactly. It brings the data to life. You can literally see how maybe a new product starts gaining traction over the months or how customer preferences shift. It's fantastic for spotting those temporal trends. And ultimately, this whole RFM analysis package, the categories, the matrix, the charts, the scatter plot, it gives businesses incredibly actionable insights. It empowers you to create hyper-specific, tailored strategies for customer retention, for upselling, cross-selling, even for preventing churn before it happens, because you're not just treating all customers the same anymore. You understand the specific value and behavior of distinct segments, and you can act accordingly. It turns abstract data into concrete business initiatives.
Wow. Okay, so today we've really unpacked some seriously powerful ways to slice and dice customer data using Power BI.
Yeah.
From those foundational comparison indicators and the strategic quadrant analysis, right through to the deep strategic insights you get from RFM modeling. You listening should now have a solid framework for not just seeing data, but really understanding the stories hidden within it.
Mm-hmm. And remember that point we started with, about communicating effectively with analytical tools, with AI. Understanding these kinds of analyses deeply is what equips you to ask sophisticated questions, to formulate better prompts, and ultimately to get truly valuable information out of any data tool you use. It goes way beyond just technical skill. It's about knowing what to ask and how to interpret the answers you get back so you can make genuinely strategic decisions.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought for you to mull over based on everything we've discussed. Now that you understand how to segment and value customers with this kind of precision, using RFM, for instance, what do you think is the single most valuable action a business should take specifically for their important retention customers, those valuable folks who haven't bought recently, to make sure they don't churn for good? Think about how these Power BI insights could drive a real, tangible business impact there. Lots to consider. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time.